right. Welcome back to the Applied Leadership Podcast. My name is Brandon Young, and as always, I am joined by my good friend and business partner, Blaine Smith. And we have got a really fun topic to chop up today. It's a question that we get, frankly, fairly frequently, and it's also something that we just see kind of floating around in the leadership soup. And the question is, what do you guys think about self-leadership? So let's just get into it. Blaine, what do you think about self-leadership? What do we think about self-leadership?
Well, we think a lot about it. And I think generally speaking, we would recognize it as critically important. I think if anybody wants to have an ability to be responsible for others, to lead others, we do have to have some dominion over the self. You know, when we talk about people who are going to potentially present with us, I often remind people that I think there are three things that we need to kind of have command of in order to be effective in speaking to an audience. And I think that is first, command of the content. So if you know your stuff, you're just going to be a lot more confident and probably do a lot better. So we don't ever want to go into a situation, whether that's in a conference room or on a stage or whatever, where we are there to deliver a powerful message or to lead people and not know our stuff. So the first thing is know your stuff, have command of the content, command of the subject matter. So don't skip on that. No matter how good a talker you are, you need to really know your stuff. That seems to matter. The second one, though, is command of self. And I think about that as, do you have the ability to control your emotions, to kind of manage your heart rate, to pay attention to what's going on with you so that you can be calm and confident and bring your best self to the table in these moments. And whether that's a stressful moment at work or a presentation, I think that remains the same. And the third thing we always talk about is, can you command a room or command an audience, which is a little separate from this conversation, but I'm throwing it in there because I said there were three. So ultimately, you do need to be able to sense the room, pay attention to people, engage with people, maintain their attention, things like that. So command of self, really important. I would say that we tend not to use the term self-leadership because we've evolved our thinking a little bit and have come around to this idea that we would probably just call that discipline. Our working definition of leadership is that it is a relational process of influence that yields results. And so when we're talking about leadership, which is our business every day, we're always thinking of it through the lens of it being a relational process, it kind of requiring others and involving influence toward a result. But we do love this idea of discipline, and I think we would count it as one of the most important things to focus on if you want to be effective at leadership, because leadership is hard, especially if you care. And one's ability to have discipline ensures that you can have command over the content and the subject matter, and it ensures that you can have command over yourself, which might look like regulating your emotions in a intense moment, but it also might look like doing all the things you need to do potentially leading up to that moment so that you can show up as your best self, whether that's rested, trained, fit, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll pause there. That's kind of an overview, but we think of it more as discipline. We think it's super important. And it really allows you to be your best in moments of highest stress, presuming that you've kind of put in the work a little at a time all along the way.
Yeah, you're so damn smart. I just love it. Yeah, that's
go on.
That's great. And I think that we do talk about this a lot, and we do view it through the lens of discipline. So I just want to kind of maybe vector in on that. And I love the fact that you've shared the command element here, right? It's part of credibility, which we think is a really critical process. When you are leading, if you're an executive, when we talk about executive presence, or when you are leading in a space like we are often called in to businesses to do, you really need to have this intersection of both credibility and relatability. And when we talk about these ideas of, command of content, self, and room, there's the credibility aspect of that is so important before we walk into that space. And it's just as important as a leader of a team, an executive, a leader of an organization, whatever it is, because you're basically going to you're going to lose credibility if you don't have that command. And I want to go back to discipline because it really requires discipline, which simply stated, if we can just delve into that for a bit, is doing what is good, not what feels good. And I think that that's a really important thing to bring into the conversation because we think it's critical. In fact, we think it's so critical, being the word nerds that we are, that we're asking our friends, our colleagues, our partners, all of you who are on this journey with us on the trail here, like, let's take it back. Help us take it back, because discipline really it's not that mysterious, but it's really hard. Right. And let's just call it what it is.
Simple, not easy.
Simple, not easy, and if it's something that you find struggle with, you're in good company, because we all do, right? Every one of us. And I think that we're pretty, disciplined guys, right? We have some processes that we follow that we know are good to-dos, as our friend Steve Shenbaum would say. Good to-dos is, get in bed early when you're out on the road. Good to-do is get up early, make sure that you get your workout in the gym. Good to-do is make sure that you're, doing your rehearsals, because you can't have the command of the content if you don't know the content. And by virtue of that, then, you'll really lose the room. And the other aspect of the command of self, why discipline is so important there, is I'll go back to that definition or the way that we think about it. It's not a hard definition, but doing what is good, not what feels good. When we think about command of self in the midst of one of those rooms, which is a leadership situation for us, so it transcends to anybody else who's leading, whether it's on the production floor in a factory or, leading a sales territory or whatever. There are a lot of times when we're in interactions that you have some feels, and emotion is evoked based on what is said, what is discussed. Maybe it's a contentious decision. Maybe it's just a topic that you have very strong feelings about, frankly, such as discipline, like we have strong feelings about. And it evokes a reaction in you. Now, what might feel good is to let that reaction bubble out. But what might be most good is to listen a little bit more. To hold yourself back and not speak just yet, to allow the situation to develop a little bit more. Maybe instead of saying exactly what you think, asking a question and being willing to listen to gather a little bit more information. That's one of the biggest things that I think about when I think about discipline, and we're kind of in the context of command of self within that room, because you and I remind each other this all the time. Resist the urge to be profound. And sometimes when we're in the midst of an unfolding workshop, there's something that is said in the room, and I want to say something so badly, and I can feel it, and I'm just like, I can feel it inside of me, and I'm just like, don't say it.
I can feel it for you in those moments.
Don't say it. And I will tell you that, probably 25% of the time will what I have to say what I think I want to say come out of my mouth. And, 75% of the time, it is more wise for me to slow my roll. And what I have found is that it creates more space for that. Maybe it's that sentiment or that point to come from the room and not from me. And that is so important, because all the answers are in the room. And I think that happens with leadership as well. The answers are often in the team, and exercising a little bit of that discipline to say, I want to say something, but I'm not going to. Because even though, this is good, it might not be most good. What might be most good is to exercise a little bit of that patience and let it come forward.
Yeah, I really like that a lot. You're drawing on a couple of things that I want to hit on. The first is that we live in a world now with almost infinite sort of choices and possibilities. And maybe this has been said for generations, but it feels like discipline right now is as important as it's ever been. And I think that if you do have a certain level of discipline, it is a total game changer, a huge competitive advantage for you as an individual and as a leader, because we have just limitless conveniences at our fingertips and hacks and just choices to make, that so many so that it can be paralyzing. And it's very easy to work ourselves into a place where we can really see our discipline kind of deteriorate, and our ability to have command over self and our agency just sort of be handed over. So I think it's something that we really got to focus on. And the other thing you mentioned that I really liked is that sometimes discipline isn't just about doing the things that you need to do or doing what is good. It can also be about not doing things, right? It can be about not speaking up even though you have an urge to, not having a big reaction to something until you've had a chance to think about it, not grabbing the cookie, whatever the case may be. Discipline can be both, and a willingness and an ability to do what needs to be done, but the same willingness and ability to refrain from doing things that don't need to be done, or at least not done by us, or maybe not right now. The Stoic virtue of temperance. It's one of the 4 Stoic virtues, right? Temperance. It's really, really important. And that's, Ryan Holiday just wrote a book recently that's called Discipline is Destiny. And he basically transposes the words. He says, or supplements the word or replaces it, and trades temperance for discipline, which is a word that we kind of generally understand. One place where I might take a little exception to the Stoic framework is that, 2 of the 4 tenets are temperance and wisdom. And I think they're separate, and maybe they belong as distinct entities. I would submit, and I think maybe you would agree with me, that one's ability to demonstrate discipline actually leads them to an ability to eventually have and display wisdom. And perhaps that's how the Stoics meant it too. So I don't mean to try to draw a hard line there. But what I have found in my own experience is that when I'm most disciplined, when I have most command over self, I have most access to wisdom. I have the ability to hear that sort of still small voice in my head. I have the ability to listen to kind of the angel on my shoulder versus the devil. I have the ability to pay attention to things that might be speaking to me, and I might have blown past if I was a little less disciplined. And I have the ability to exercise some really great human qualities like judgment, like discernment, perhaps even thinking about like, what's the moral thing to do here, not just what's the kind of legal or thing I can do here. So that's getting to pretty deep waters there. But I think that one's ability to exercise discipline leads to so many positive downstream things that go far beyond just staying fit or sticking to a routine or having good habits. It actually allows you to be a person who can dispense a lot more wisdom into the world because you've set the conditions to sort of gain and then distribute that wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we should go into the deep waters. I'll swim in there with you. I mean, look at we've mentioned Stoicism now, and the Stoics being one of the more prominent of the, Greek philosophies, worldviews that has really shaped the West. I think you also, can look at that and say, Judeo-Christian ethic that has also really shaped the West and the way that we think. And, all of it makes sense. And you get into deep waters, and the outcome of wisdom, is what I'm hearing based on the action of discipline, is that I am actioning discipline in the face of all the complexities of the world. And I'm here to tell you, we can all rest assured that those in the ancient Near East and in ancient Greece had their own litany of complexities that they were dealing with for their time. Yeah. Nothing is new under the sun.
Read the literature. Solomon said. All there.
Exactly. It's literally all there. And the reason I love, and when you do read the literature, you will go back and see that, the roots here of the word that we use for discipline, before it was transliterated into Latin, the roots were in the Greek and the Hebrew, the Greek being paideia and the Hebrew being yasar. And what those were is what it meant: a sharp instruction of a disciple, or one who follows you, of a student, a pupil, a disciple, one who follows you. So it is sharp instruction. And we wrote about this in our book, Perseverance is Greater Than Endurance, in the growth chapter specifically, because we think it's really important to kind of, get to first principles thinking when you're talking about any of these kind of big words, especially ones that are, frankly, laced with so many barbs on the outside of them, where people are just like, I don't know what to think about it. And when you go back to, ground level here, and you think about, well, what does paideia and what does yasar mean? Well, it means sharp instruction. So if you feel like there are some barbs to the world, well, you're kind of reading it right, because there are some barbs to that, right? I mean, I don't want to be sharply instructed. I don't want to be, I don't want to be pounded. I don't want to go back to, drill sergeant in basic training, or, my RASP or RIP instructors or Ranger School instructors who were, pounding the kind of stuff into you, disciplining us over and over and over again. If we're being honest, nobody wants that. It doesn't feel good. But if we're also being honest, and we ask the question, but who wants the outcomes of the disciplining process? Who wants somebody who shows up to work on time, is dressed appropriately, speaks to customers with care and consideration, does their job, keeps their goals front and center and works towards that? Who wants the outcome of discipline? Every single company in the United States of America wants workers who can actually demonstrate discipline. Every single worker wants leaders who can demonstrate that discipline. And so I love how you've kind of like peeled apart both these concepts of virtue of, temperance or discipline and wisdom, because they are bound. They are intrinsically connected, just in the root of what we're talking about, because it is both an action, but it's also an outcome. And though the action may sometimes feel a little bit difficult, like, even me, like, the discipline, like, I want more than anything right now to go have a third cup of coffee, primarily because you know me, and it's basically my delivery mechanism for sugar. But I know that I don't need another tablespoon of sugar right now. I know I don't need that. And so that is a sharp correction of my actions, but it's going to lead to the desired outcome. It's the wisdom to know that, my body doesn't need it. I'm getting a little bit older, and it's probably going to be good for me in the long run.
Yeah, totally. And where I think this is really important for leaders, especially, because I think this is something we're speaking about broadly and is important for all of us if we want to be in pursuit of kind of being our best selves. But where I think it's really critical for leaders is that taking a disciplined approach to life and work in general just sets a really great example for others. And that might seem kind of trite, like duh, but it matters a great deal. When you are a leader that approaches things with that kind of discipline, it does really good stuff for your folks. And in addition to just sort of being a good example for them to follow, it also tends to breed a lot of calm and a lot of trust and a lot of confidence, right? Which sets the conditions for others to exercise a similar level of discipline. Because when people are anxious, when they're worried, when they think their leaders are going to like pivot left and right, and you're kind of pinging around and having a hard time staying focused on priorities, that does not breed confidence or calm within your people. And it's just going to make it that much harder for them to be disciplined in their approach. So it really does roll downhill or radiate out, or whatever metaphor you want to use. It makes a big difference for your people. It's kind of goes back to the cool breeds cool thing that we talk about all the time. Our ability as leaders to exercise discipline gives others permission and the ability to do the same, especially if they're not maybe as predisposed to it as you might be as a leader. There was one other thing I wanted to mention, Brandon, that you hit on that I think we need to kind of run to ground, is this idea of being of following something, of, being a student, a pupil, a disciple of something, and following something.
Oh yeah.
Right. Because where I think we can go all day long about discipline and really feel like we understand it. But I think the work of an individual and a leader is to think really, really hard about what are we leading ourselves toward? What are we following? Right. So if we're talking about self-leadership or discipline, however you want to say it, what we're oriented toward actually probably matters most. So doing the hard work to think about, what really do I want to be about? What do I want my work to represent? Who do I want to care for and serve? What does this all mean? Like, can I address some of the bigger questions and get really clear on the kind of for who, for what, as we often refer to it as? Then I think it becomes a lot easier to at least get clear on what are the habits, practices, routines, right? Stuff we need to do that we can be disciplined toward. Because if we don't do that step, like, all we end up doing is just, like, you can listen to Huberman or Attia or any of these people who are giving out wonderful information, but you're just kind of like doing a morning routine for its own sake, and not because it really aligns with something that means some, has a deep meaning and purpose for you. And I think we have to do that. One of the things I see so much on the internet is people who talk endlessly about health, wellness, fitness, technology, politics even. And when asked some of these bigger questions, they feel completely stumped. I heard a podcast recently on Honestly with Mark Andreessen. And the guy's incredibly successful, incredibly smart, very thoughtful, and becoming very influential now that he sits so close to kind of the president-elect's right hand. He talks really fast, has a lot to say about a lot of stuff. And she asked him some bigger questions about purpose, or, do you think there's a God? And the guy just had kind of nothing to say about some of these bigger questions. And that concerns me, because here's a person who might have the ability to exercise tremendous leadership, if not certainly a lot of influence over a lot of people. And at least in my very kind of surface estimation of it, that kind of power and influence shouldn't be wielded by somebody who hasn't thought really hard about these bigger questions. Because if these decisions aren't tied to some underlying morality or purpose or kind of bigger thing, then you can have all the discipline in the world you want to invest, to build a business, to do all these things. But is it a road to nowhere? I don't know, that's getting even...
Well, it's a road to somewhere, right? That's the point.
Yeah, it might be the road to hell paved with good intentions if we're not careful. And I'm deepening the waters here for you, Brandon. We've got 5 or 6 minutes to wrap this up, but I couldn't let this conversation go without making a mention of disciplined to what, for whom. We probably need to do a lot of work on that first, and then we can build the habits, the routines that we then need to do the hard work of adhering to.
You're exactly right. And again, those are the deep waters when you're really getting into this idea of discipline. I think Jocko Willink likes to say and puts on a shirt, discipline equals freedom, or discipline is freedom, I think is what it says. And I totally agree. But the freedom to do what is the question. And, think about it just even in the American context, right? We so closely hold on to freedom, and yet that also has to be held in tension with, the bonds and commitments of citizenship. The fact that we do owe to one another, we owe each other something.
Liberty, right? Responsibility. You have to have both, right?
Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. It's liberty and responsibility, which has to be held in that tension, because you're right. Where does the road lead? The road doesn't lead to nowhere. It leads somewhere. So it would be wise to consider what is the wheel that I am disciplining myself to, so to speak, right? If I'm out there navigating and I'm disciplining myself to the needle of the compass because I know that the compass is pointing to magnetic north, and I know how to make sense of all of that, that's telling me what I am disciplining my movement in my direction to. what is your compass? And when you think about anybody who's in a leadership perspective, we would consider this as it's good to consider, what are your core values? Like what do you really believe in life? Because in the end of the day, you're going to get past, the tactics based and situational based leadership, and you're going to get into values based leadership. When you start to confront the shit that wasn't in the brochure, you're going to have to actually deal with it. And that's one of the reasons I am, again, thanks for tossing me a softball, 6 minutes left. But, it reminds me of the advancement in thought in the, psychological, sociological, academic spheres around leadership, where you start to see in the 2000s this authentic leadership theory starting to emerge. And take a look at it. If you guys really want to wow out, do yourself a favor and get the book Leadership by Nordhaus. It's an excellent guide into seeing how all of this has kind of emerged, and one that we draw upon a lot when we discuss our Foundations of Leadership module with organizations out there in workshops. But the unique thing about authentic leadership is that it's the first time in kind of modern sociological, psychological, these academic spheres that you start to see moral reasoning injected into the leadership process. And in situations that we are kind of engaging with, you see this confluence of both positive psychology characteristics, right? Things like hope and optimism, and moral reasoning, which gets into these things around like temperance, right? What is a demonstration of true power? Restraint, right? That is a demonstration of true power, things like that. And I think it's really important for us to think about this as leaders, because the world is complex. It's very complex, and we are confronted with a number of different scenarios and situations by which there is no playbook for. Like, guys, there's really no playbook for the devastation and destruction we're seeing in Los Angeles right now. There's not much of a playbook, right? So we need to kind of come back to some of those, ground truth matters of morality, and ground truth matters of, how do we actually deal with this from a heart perspective? Because yes, it's devastating, destruction, money, all that stuff. There are human beings who are just flat out devastated and hurting right now, and we need to deal with that.
Yeah. And maybe I'll try to put a bow on this.
Yeah, good luck.
Let's go back to the 4 Stoic virtues really quick, and you can compare them to anybody who's on a spiritual journey or a faith journey of wisdom, justice, temperance, and courage. So let's think about this. If we want to really lead ourselves, if we want to have discipline, it ultimately comes down, I think, to are we students? Are we willing to learn? Are we willing to do what we need to do to have wisdom, to understand what's going on? Then are we able to decipher kind of what's right and wrong? We do it sometimes in our lives, have to figure out what is right or what is good, right? Can we apply a sense of justice to things? Can we then discipline ourselves through that process, right? Can we have temperance to stay on the path? And then from time to time, and maybe this is a different podcast, Brandon, can we display the courage necessary to stay on that path and stand up for others who may be less fortunate or in a weaker position in order to uphold all of those? They all work together. And I think that if we want to pursue anything with vigor, we have to be willing to look at all of those working together. So that's 30 minutes on self-leadership / discipline. and it basically is everything, as it turns out.
I would be remiss, and I'm confident that I will get at least 6 text messages from my seminary professors if I don't also mention how clearly and cleanly that ties on to the Judeo-Christian ethic, right?
Course,
you think about things like, and these 3 things remain: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Right? I mean, love is the action, right? We're talking about really doing it, really getting out there and doing it. And in addition to that, I mean, one of my very favorite things, all truth is God's truth, right? And you look at that, you tie everything you said in terms of, the the four Stoic virtues, they all tie directly over into that same exact ethic. You want to talk about justice, you are hard pressed to find more clear writing about the critical aspect of justice, or as Martin Luther King once said, the arc of the universe bends towards justice, the moral universe, right? Or which actually was a paraphrase from a Unitarian minister in the 1800s who was an abolitionist. Anyways, but or you go to courage. Have I not told you? Do not be afraid. Joshua 1:9. Over and over again, the Bible talks about like, hey, don't be afraid. Come to me, because the opposite of fear is
love. Wow, we got all the way to love. That's even further down the road than I thought we'd get. So still a lot of meat on the bone, but this has been fun. This one kind of snuck up on me as a great conversation. So thanks for doing it with me, and thanks for listening along. If you guys are interested in the podcast and have a question that you'd like to see us kick around, please just send us a note to contact@appliedleadershippartners.com. We'll read every one of them. We'll do our best to talk about them here on the show. And if this has been an interesting conversation with you, we would ask you, please do us a favor, do your friends a favor, and share it around a little bit and start a conversation of your own. Nothing would be cooler than that. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.